Nice. And there's quite a bit of information for this chapter 9. We kind of range from a bunch of objects and alert boxes, but I kind of want to focus on this prompt method, if statements, alert, and confirm. And for your assignment, this concept of array of numbers with this control.split. So unfortunately, we hit for loops after chapter 9 and chapter 10, but I'll show us how to do this for project 4 for those of us working on it, and then we'll cover them again later. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my code for stats real quick. Cool. And what we saw last time is that I had this basic code running for us. What I'm going to try to do now is create another input field. I'm not going to give it a type. And let me just make it blank here. Let me see here. Put it back open. Cool. And what I could try to do now, similar to our stats assignment, is if I type something into here, maybe like splitting it like this, how do I go ahead and get this code when I click it to put it over there? So for this assignment, you're most likely going to have, you can either just do this directly in your script, but I'm going to go ahead and make this separated from there. If I want to try to get the information from what the user typed in here, what I will need to do is go ahead and create an ID for this field. And I could call this ID something like text. I believe, what did they call it in the assignment? Text control. So they call this one text control. I'll go ahead and do the same. Let's see here. And I'm going to go ahead. Oops. And when I hit this button, I want to see if I can get the text from over here. So what I'll try to do here is I'm going to say document.getElementById, and I'm going to get it from text control. And then I'm going to try to see if I can get the text content. So if I can go ahead and get this text content, let me save this to a message. And then I'm going to console.log this message here, okay? Cool. So you'll notice we're running into this issue again where whenever we're working with this text field, I can't get the pieces of information out of there properly. My test and test aren't showing. So this is where our form comes into handy and why we want to use it with these prompts that we're using. So what you could do next here, and most likely some of us might have already have done this on the project 4 if you're working on it, but I'm going to go ahead and make a form. I'm going to put all these guys inside of the form, and if I want to go ahead and get the piece of text that's being typed into here by the user, instead of referencing the ID directly, I'm going to need to pass the form that I'm currently in into my prompt over here. So I'm going to leave this one make text as normal. I'm going to create a second function. I'm going to call this one get user entry. And I'm going to take in a form. This can actually be called whatever you want it to be. Parameter names don't matter. I'll call this one form. And on click, instead of getting make text, I'm going to get, what did I call it? Get user entry. So on click, I'm going to say get user entry, make this full screen. And I'm going to pass this dot form into this field here. So this is something that we've seen in the previous assignment that we were doing earlier, but let's go ahead and see if this guy works for us. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to log the form that I get from the user when I do this. And you'll notice here, thankfully, I get my form and I have all these input devices with it. Now, the cool thing about forms and why we're going to be referencing them here is I can use form, oops, I believe it's called entries. Let's see what happens if I use form.entries. Oops, what is that one called? Sorry, everyone. I have too many examples here. Jeez. So what I could say here, I think it was called elements. Cool. So you'll notice here, when I use console.log form.elements, I get a bunch of information here. And this is going a bit overboard with like how much I want to show everyone. But essentially, you get this terminology called an array back. And an array essentially is something that contains multiple objects inside of it. You can kind of think of it like a list. Or for instance, in Zoom, there's a participant channel or a participant array. And that contains an array of all the students in the class right now. This is similar to what we have here. And if we go ahead and we scroll down through all of this, if we take a look at, I believe we might be able to find where we have the actual piece of text, you'll see here that my next element inside of this is text. And all this stuff is built in for you, but this is where the information will be held. So if I type out form.elements, I get an array of the elements in my form. And an array essentially starts counting from a 0 and up. And we'll look at that in chapter 10 more. But essentially, if I want to take a look at my first element in my array, I would need to call it a 0. But the other thing I can do is actually try to reference the key using the ID. So essentially, the one item in my array I want to get is this text field called text control. So what I'm going to say here is go ahead and get the text control field of my array. And now if I rerun this one more time, you'll see that instead of getting all of them, I just get this individual instance. Now, why is it important that I get this individual instance? Well, I can now go ahead and try to get the value of it. Oops. Go ahead and I'll need to put this inside of the console.log. Sorry about that. Nice. And this is a lot of work to do something that's kind of straightforward. We'll look at more effective ways later. But in general, what's happening is I pass my form that has all my text inside of it into this guy. And I parse my form in order to get the specific input that I want. So again, this is useful if you have multiple input fields. I now can get text control. And this is working out okay. So I'm logging this, but what is an issue with doing this here is in your project 4, what you're asked to do is input these guys with a bunch of spaces in them. So why are we doing that? Well, we're going to want to try to calculate differences like in the means, standard deviation and stuff in there. And let me go ahead and put out space a few times. So I'm getting all of them there. Let me go ahead and create a message, or I'll call this user entry is equal to this snippet of code that I just made. I'll comment these out so they don't run. Oops, that looks a bit neater on the eyes. Make sure you always have your semicolons. Okay. So you'll see here that whenever I click it, I get this big string back. And you might be wondering, well, let's just say that I'm putting in numbers here. So I put in 10, 20, and 30. And I want to add all these numbers up here. You'll notice, how do I add them up, each of them separated by space? How do I actually do that? Well, do I do something like user entry 0 or 1? You can't really figure out a way to get each of these guys separated unless you use a method that's given to you here called split. So in your code here, you'll notice you get a snippet of code in project 4 that says array of numbers is equal to text control.value.split. So you'll see here we're actually getting the value from our form of text control up here, and now we're going to split that value. So let me go ahead and do that for us. I'm going to say var array of values is equal to user entry. And I'm going to use this dot split command. You'll see here, let's go ahead and rerun this. I'll go ahead and put in 10 normally. And you'll notice this is a bit different. It's not just a piece of text. It looks like it has two brackets around it, and there's a string in there. And you'll see in here that this is going to give me an array item. So now this guy is an array of all these values because I split up the string that the user put in into this array. So first of all, you're going to grab the string from the user, and then you're going to make the string into an array. Okay. Now I'm kind of combining, this is a lot of chapter 10 that we're doing right now, but I just want to showcase kind of one area for project 4. It's important. And after we go ahead and do this here, what we could do now is try to work with this array using something called a for loop. Okay. So before we do a for loop, let's see what happens if I refresh this and I type in 10, 20, 30, 40, 500. You'll see here that I have all these guys. Oh, looks like they're not. Oh, I forgot to add in my two. So split is going to work where it splits them based off of the space there. I forgot to add in my two spaces that tells it to do that. That was my fault. So you see here, if I add in a space inside of my split command, it's going to use the space to split these into an array. Cool. Now this is looking a bit more like it, and for those of us that might have programmed before, this might start look a bit familiar here. You'll see here at index 0, index is a term we'll see soon, we have our 10. At index 1 we have our 20. At our index 3 we have a 30. Index or 2 is 30, and index 3 we have 40. Okay.
Question: instead of if you hadn't used just a space on the split condition, let's say if you had used comma.
Nice, great question, right? So how about we
or even let's call it the letter A.
The letter A, sure. So let's just say that someone has a weird keyboard or something, right? And every time they press space, it puts an A in there. What you could do now is you'll say, okay, I know the user has that, so what I'm going to say is split by A. Let me refresh my code. Cool. And it works just the same. Unfortunately, though, because I'm splitting by A, I have that empty one there, so you might need to do something where you remove the end.
If you delete the last A, probably wouldn't get it.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Cool. So that gets rid of it there. And the same idea here. What if I use colons? Okay.
Good.
Nice. 10, 20, and 30. Okay. So for your project 4 specifics, it's asking you to use split with the dots or with the space. So we're going to use the empty space here. So that's kind of a basic one. Usually in other languages like Python, if you leave it blank, it defaults to that empty space. Fortunately, JavaScript, it doesn't. But now we have this issue is, okay, where, what's the point of kind of doing this here? Or like, where do I go next with my array? So I have all my items here. There's, can I sum them up, or what can I do here? Well, what you're going to want to do, let me just make sure this is working okay. Nice. We're going to want to try to loop through these items. So now, chapter 10 covers quite a bit of this, but there's this type of flow here, and I'll introduce the syntax here. There's something called a for loop. Now, essentially, an array in JavaScript is this container. It's a variable that holds other variables. So it's like, you can kind of think of it as like a storage container. That's its only purpose is to store the variables. And as you can see up here, we kind of have it with these two brackets. It's storing each of these guys over there. And what we want to do, a for loop essentially is going to be this type of guy that goes ahead and says, you know what, I'm going to visit each of these individuals. So I'm going to visit 10, I'm going to visit 20, I'm going to visit 30, and I'm going to visit 40. So a for loop looks at each of these instances of your variables in there. And a for loop, the syntax that I'm going to show you, again, the thing about JavaScript is that it's up to the user on how they want to do it. But a for loop usually runs for the entire length of your list there. Okay. So to get started with a for loop here, surprisingly enough, the syntax you're going to use is called for. So you're going to type out the keyword for, and you're going to do this special. You might have noticed how my for loop is pink here. So that's a keyword in JavaScript. I'm going to add in these two parentheses, and then I'm going to open up my conditional here. Now you'll notice that these two guys opened up look a lot similar like my function opening up, and that's the same idea. My for loop is going to run, but he's only going to run for a few times. But you'll notice I'm getting an error, and I'm getting this error that says expression expected. I'll give us the general syntax of what we're using here. What we want to do is have our loop run through each of these guys. The way that you can create this variable is you can make a variable like I is usually used. I'll call one called index or A. You can call this A or foobar, whatever you like to do. Let's just stick with index because that's kind of the keyword that I've been saying a bit. And what you're going to say is your first expression is going to be I or index is equal to 0, because you're going to be telling JavaScript where you want to start. And we want to start at 0, which is right here, which is our 10. So index is going to be telling us start at 10. And now we're prompted to, okay, well, how long do I want to run? Do I want to run until 1 or 2? Well, we kind of want to run the length of this array. Now, before we do that, let's just kind of do a simpler example. Instead of hard coding in this value, do a conditional here. What I'm going to show us is after we set this one to 0, I'm going to go ahead and make this condition that should tell me how long I want my for loop to run. I'm going to redeclare my variable index, so I'm going to reference my 0. And this second part, let me say while index is less than 5, this symbol right here, which is kind of like this open and close bracket,
Isn't it less than 4 though?
Yep, so in this scenario, this would be less than 4. But for the time being, I just want to show us how a for loop kind of can run for us, and then I'll implement the array. So let's just kind of make a value up for right now. Let's just call it 5. And so what you're doing is you're starting out your variable value, you're setting the condition for how long this variable should run, and your last part is your incrementer, or what should happen each time this thing loops. So what we're going to say right here is how many values do I want index to increase by each time my index goes. So what I could say here is index plus plus, and this plus plus will add 1 to it. So an index plus plus will just say from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2. If this is a lot at once, we haven't hit chapter 10 yet, so chapter 9 and 10 kind of cover both of these together. But for the time being, this is kind of the regular syntax you'll be using, where you go ahead and set it to 0, you have a conditional, and then you increment it. Now let's just do something really basic, where I say console.log index. So I created this variable called index, and I'm going to log it in this for loop, okay? I'm going to type in 10 into my click to run code. And you'll notice here, let me actually comment out all console logs except for this guy. In my console, I get from 0, so I start at 0. I go to 1, because my conditional here is still true. Is 0 less than 5? It is. So what needs to happen? 0 plus plus. This runs. 0 is it goes up to 1. Is 1 less than 5? It's not. So run this snippet of code and then add 1 to it. Is 2 less than 5, and so forth. So what happens if I put this guy to tree? We'll see here that I only get tree and 4 because I start at tree. Is tree less than 5? it is. So you run this code, you increment it by 1. Is 4 less than 5? It is, so you print out 4, increment it by 1. Is 5 less than 5? It isn't, it's equal to 5. So we go ahead and we don't print it out. So you'll see here that my 5 isn't printed out. How would I actually go ahead and print out my 5? Well, I can actually add an equal sign right here. What this will say now is less than or equal to 5. And if I go ahead and click this guy now, you'll see that I get 3, 4, and 5 printed out here. Okay. This logic right here, this less than or equal to, is something, see here, that the books kind of focus on. And this is this concept of an if statement. So I just want to kind of, I was saying I was just taking out some things from chapter 9 because we'll go through majority of it together. But an if statement is this concept of conditions. Sullivan mentioned that term earlier, is a condition that will happen in your code. So a condition, again, is something where if something is true, then do something or do something else. So this harkens back to what we saw earlier with our true and false. And an if statement is essentially created by saying something like a for loop where I could say if, and then I have a condition. So an if statement is very basic. We actually use it in our lives all the time. If I'm not sick, I will go to work. So is the condition sick or not? Is it true or not? So let's go ahead and try to play around with this concept a little bit. I'm going to make a variable called is sick, and I'm going to set it to false. So let's just say that we have a person and they're not sick and they're healthy. So what I'm going to say here now is in my if statement, I'm going to say if is sick is equal to, and these two equal signs, you'll notice that I'm kind of throwing them in there a few times. But what this will do will check for equality. So this is saying something similar to like if my name is equal to John, or if is sick is equal to false. What I could say here now, okay, so let's just say if is sick is false, I'm going to log going to work. I'll keep this guy down here. I should comment him real quick. And again, everyone, I'm putting this inside of my button code, so it just always runs. But I'm going to hit click to run. And you'll see here now that I have going to work. So every time I click this button, this if statement runs, and this if statement is just a logic flow, okay? So essentially, if a certain condition is true, then enter into it. So if this is true, go inside of here, and then do your work inside of there. Otherwise, something else might happen. So you might notice here, I might be able to add something here like not going to work. And if I click it, you'll see here that I have this issue where in my code, even though I say var is sick is false, I'm still printing out not going to work here, which isn't that good, right? I want to only have my code say, okay, well, I am going to work, I'm not going to work. Essentially what's happening is that your if condition runs, and then this runs immediately after it, because it doesn't, these guys are put after it. So what you'd want to do is this concept of an else, which the book also kind of looks at. And the else statement is something that will run if the if statement isn't true. So essentially what you could say after your if statement is else. Let's go here. So now I'm saying var is sick is false. If is sick is equal to false, console.log going to work. Otherwise, log not going to work. So let me go ahead and refresh this. And we'll see here now that my code says going to work, and I got rid of the issue where it said not going to work there. Now, what happens if I change this guy to true? So I have var is sick is equal to true. If is sick is equal to false. So is this condition true? It's not, right? Because what's the value of is sick? It's true. It's not false. And so if I go ahead and click run here, you'll see now I'm getting not going to work.
Got it. So one question. So it is basically I have to declare a variable and then I run the if statement.
Awesome, great work. So this if statement, actually, you don't need to declare a variable. That's a really good point. So this can kind of occur in a lot of different scenarios. And the general idea is that this condition doesn't really matter as much as the general concepts here. So an if and else, if you're kind of understanding the logic flow, it's good. But this if statement can run with just basic facts here. So it's a condition can be anything. So if I say if 5 is equal to 5, this is going to sound weird, but now it's going to say, well, this should run here. Now we'll say I'm going to work because 5 is equal to 5. And then I'll say if 5 is greater than 5, because that's not true, then I'm getting this other one. But again, if I add in this equal sign here, if 5 is greater than or equal to 5, now I'm getting going to work again because it's equal to. So you don't need to declare a variable. Oh, question?
Yes, really quick, because that's like being on the way of me understanding the whole thing. So console log, I'm always gonna use that thing no matter what.
Oh,
it's not like is there any other way for me to read a variable, or just like?
So the way that we're doing this in JavaScript with online, you usually use console log. If you're familiar with other languages like JavaScript or Java or Python, this is very similar to a print statement. But you can also use print.
Okay.
This is just another print statement.
Got it.
There you go.
What the heck is console log?
Yeah, it's a very. I'm only using it because it pops up on this screen here. But yeah, let me add that.
Oh, okay. But that is pretty much the print.
It's pretty much your print to JavaScript. And the reason that console log is used so much is because JavaScript is used with HTML so much that like they kind of go hand in hand.
Okay.
But it's this.
But that doesn't mean that I can use the information that is presented on console log.
Yeah.
Because it's just a print.
It's just a print statement. Yeah, that's all that's doing for us. You'll see here if I didn't expect that to happen.
You're printing.
So if I actually type out print, I think JavaScript runs my print dialog box. Okay, so that's probably why we're going to use console log there. Okay, cool.
Okay, good.
But that's
sorry to interrupt. It was
fine.
like
that was a good question though, because I don't want to be throwing too much at us at once. Okay, Felipe, I saw you unmute. Did you have a question with that one?
No, I do not.
Oh, okay, sorry. Nice, cool. So again, in general, your variables, you don't need to declare them. But when we're working with them, you might declare them like that. Now, when you code more, you'll get more familiar with it. But there's tricks of the trade where, like, if you type out if is sick, that's checking if is sick is true all the time. So that's another way to do it, but we don't need to worry about that. But as you get more familiar with these conditions and stuff, those are things that will just happen. So if we go ahead and we try to look at this concept here of 0 up to 5, we can actually kind of make this code a bit more unique here. I could say if index is equal to 2, console.log, I am at 2. And then I can try to do this one more time. Else, I am not at 2. Let's do something like this. So I'm going from 0 up to 5 here. So let me refresh this. Okay, let me click my button. Cool. So now I get my not going to work, but you'll notice that I start at 0 and 1. So 0 and 1 happen twice. You'll notice I get to 2 there. Unfortunately, it doesn't print them out like fully for me, but it prints out 0 and then 1, and then I hit 2. So if index is equal to 2, I am at 2. Else, print out I'm not at 2. So I go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I can probably, if I send this to the
so in that case, can you console log index?
Awesome. Great. So I can go ahead and instead of something like this there,
yeah,
where I would console log the index. Yep. 0, 1, I am at 2. And I can console log index inside of here as well. There we go. It's pretty easy. Well, not too easy, I should say, but pretty straightforward, right? So one more thing that you might consider here, though, is that I'm using a lot of console logs, and it's like, well, how do I kind of say where I'm at with my value? You can kind of do some interesting tricks here, where instead of saying I am at hard-coded to, I can concatenate or add. Concatenate's another word for add. The variable index. You'll see here I actually get the same response because it's taking the variable and adding it onto my string here. I'm at 2, okay? Sorry. And one more thing, though, is that you might notice that, like, my if and else isn't that dynamic with it. So let's just say you're working with the user. Maybe in a contact form, the user only has an option to put in their phone number like twice or something. But usually nowadays, like you might have like a mobile phone or like multiple emails. There might be more than 2 options to pick from. And this is where this concepts of else if come into play. So else if is, again, this other guy that goes in between if and else. You call them else in other scenarios. And an else if will essentially be another section, another conditional that will run if this if statement isn't true. It's going to check this conditional.
I have a question that it's been hunting me throughout the first time I learned coding. What is the difference really between if and else if? Because it can just write another if.
Yep. So that's actually where an issue could arise here. That's a really good question. Why am I using else if here? So let me go ahead and try to look at a scenario where this might run. Let's see here. This scenario might not do it. But let's just see if this guy runs really quick, and then I'll show you why. Great. So you notice my else if is true, so it runs properly.
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave this code up here for us right now. Let's just say that you have a snippet of code. Let me see here. If I go ahead and create a variable, let me go ahead and create a name variable. And let me call it...
J.
Yes, actually, I'll just use my name here, John. Let's just say that if there's a keyword that we're going to be using a bit later, but you've already seen it in the array, where it was this keyword called length. Let's see if we can actually get it. There we go. I believe this should be it. Name.length. I think that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let me say testing. Okay, so this number down here is the length. Go. Okay, so my name length is 7, and it's a really good question. Is okay. Well, why do I want to use else if I can just use if? Well, let's just say that you're trying to be very specific with your code here. You'll say if name is equal less than or equal to 6. You could say something where it's see here. Let me do it this way. If name is less than or equal to 5, let me print less than 5. And then I'll do a scenario where we'll say else. I'll print name is longer than 6. And let me do my else if here one more time. And I'll show us the difference. Else if name is equal to 6. Here. Let's see here. Okay. So the difference between else and else is essentially if this guy runs and you're trying to make a block of if and else if statements, or if and else statements, the difference is that if this guy is checked and you only have it as if down here, your code will run fine. But now this guy is also checked, which might have some undetermined output for your code there. So let's say.
Okay, so let me see. Instead of using 6, let's stay on the 5, right?
Okay.
So if is less than 5, less or equal, right?
Yep.
If else is 6 equal to 6, then it's exactly 6. If it's bigger, if it's like bigger than, longer than 5, then you're gonna like, but it's not 6 because then it would go to else if.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Let me fix up this example one more time. So I'll change it from equal to less than or equal to. I'll say name less than or equal to 5, and then I'll say down here name less than or equal to 6. So again, this is just a general dynamic here.
Oh, okay.
The difference here. Let me see this guy. And let me change it to, so let's just say I use my name again instead of testing. So you'll see here, oops, 6. Oh, I should use, instead of name, I'll use name.length. That was my fault there. I should get the numerical representation of it. Cool. So the entire purpose here, sorry, it took a while to get to it. The entire purpose is using else if is if you notice here, let's say you're making a program where you only want one output to happen based on the user input. My name length is John, and if the user has a name that's less than or equal to 5, I only want this condition to happen. But let's just say you're also implementing this 6, where if they have a name that's 6 exactly or a bit less than that, then this one would happen. But you'll see here when I have a name that fits both of these conditions, they both run. And
right.
The only reason that they're both running is because this guy is an if. If I change them to an else if, and we look over here, are they both there? You'll see now that only my first one runs. So the entire purpose of an else if is to avoid this scenario. And
I see.
That's the only reason for it. And honestly, it's a good point. You can sometimes get away with using ifs repeatedly, but if you have more than 2 outputs, if you have 3 or more conditions you need to check,
you can only have one.
And you should only have one output. Really, you should use an else if. So in this scenario, it avoids the scenario where both of these are true. Because what this does essentially, the logic behind it is that if this guy is true, then it skips down to here and it checks and it notices that it says else, so it skips it. And it notices that this says else, so it skips it. But if it notices that this one is if, it checks it. That's the only difference there.
I see.
So now they're both being printed out.
Thank you.
That's this one. Yeah, I'm glad that's a very particular scenario that you'll encounter a lot in coding, but it's a good way. It's one of the things where you might not notice until later on with them. So that's why we use else ifs, and in general, it depends on your scenario, but that's how they work there. Cool. Nice. So that's kind of an example of else if. So I was a bit of a rabbit hole with that one. But again, the general idea here is that we are now looping through this array here, and you'll notice that when I let me comment these out so you can comment them back in if you wanted to. Let me put this guy right here and delete this one.
How did you comment them?
Oh, if you press Control and / in Visual Code, that adds or reduces comments like that.
Okay.
Cool. So inside of my index, you'll notice that if I use my console log, and I think I already have the array values, index, so I have too many. Okay, so let's just go back to this array example. You'll see here that my, regardless of the size of the items I'm putting in here, I'm still getting the same output. So Swava mentioned it earlier. What we want to do is we want to check the array that the user created based on their inputs, and we want to kind of loop through that array. So the way that we can loop through an array is by, first of all, making sure that our index runs the length of the array by saying array of values dot length. Again, array of values dot length is essentially going to be how many items are in this array. So let's go ahead and actually print that one out really quick. So again, if
I do a dot length of a variable that is a string, is it going to give me how many letters I have?
Yeah, exactly. That's so many letters. So if you see down here when I did JOHN, array name dot length is 4.
Oh yeah. Oh, true.
Cool. And you can kind of consider a string an array of characters or individual letters as well. So let's go ahead and do 10, 20, 30, 40. So you'll see here, my 4 up here is representing that I typed in 4 numbers. If I do 100, 200, it's now 2. Let's do this real quick. 2. And you'll notice that I always start at 0, but I only go to 1 because I increase it by 1. And again, if I make this one 300, nice. So it looks like my logic is working okay with this array. But an issue that I have now is, okay, so I'm going the length of the array, and I'm printing them out. That's fine. But how do I go ahead? Let me see here. How do I go ahead and actually get the values that the user entered into there? And this is where we'll use this term called indexing. So again, what I could say here is in my console log, the way that you approach the index of it is you type out your array name and you put in these 2 brackets after it. Okay. And these 2 brackets, yeah, exactly. So these 2 guys are essentially the position of it. So if I type out 0 in here, and this is where indexing can get a little confusing. But now what I'm going to do is I'm not getting the actual index printed out. I'm getting the elements stored at that index printed out. So let me run this one more time. We'll see I'll get 100 3 times because what is at my index of 1 is 100. Now what happens if I change this to index of 1 like so? And let me do the same example. We'll see now. Oh, I think I forgot to save it. We'll see now I get 200 printed out because if I say it this way, 0, 1, 2, that's just how it's going. Now, I'll show everyone an error that kind of plagued my early development. If I go ahead and say 100, 200, 300, and I have a 4 right here, you'll get, JavaScript's nicer about it. You'll get an undefined, but essentially what's happening is you're trying to access a value that doesn't exist, right? Because 4, where's my index of 4? Well, index 0, index 1, index 2. I don't have an index 3 or 4, so this isn't we're going to run. This is usually referred to an array out of bounds error. You just don't have access to it, but that's usually how that guy kind of runs for us. So how do we solve this issue? I'm hard coding in these index values, and I'm not sure where they are going to be located. Well, if we remember, our index is something that loops through our entire array up here. It goes from 0 up until the length of the array. And what I could say here now is why don't I print out the element at each index? And what that means now is that if I do 100, 200, 300, now you'll see here I'm getting each element printed out. And the cool thing about this is that this code works. Okay. This code works for whatever I use. So JavaScript, I know a few of us have dabbled with C and Java, I think we mentioned. Arrays in Java and C are very restrictive. You can't have multiple types, but in JavaScript, you can have multiple types in an array. JavaScript's very similar to Python in that regard. It's very dynamic. That's what we like to call it. Okay. So now using this code here, and again, this is all a lot at once. Just remember the syntax here. You can copy and paste it kind of. This is usually how you would go about getting them. Okay. Now, what we can do here now is this concept of, well, you know what? The user is supposed to, I think you guys have it more complicated. You got to find the mean, variance, and standard deviation. Why don't I kind of make this a bit more of a neater website? Let me call it calculator. And let's just say that I have a button, instead of saying click to run code, I'm going to say something like add numbers. So I'm going to say something, okay, like, it's a bit better. Add up these numbers here that I type in to the user. How do I go ahead and work with this guy? Well, what I can do now is I can go ahead and make a var. Oh, excuse me. I could go ahead and make a variable outside of my for loop. User sum. Let me set it equal to 0 for the time being. And I could say something like user sum is equal to array of values at index. And let's just go ahead and see what happens if we do it this way. Okay. Easy. 4. Oh, let me, instead of printing it out in this guy, let me print it out after my for loop. So there's a few things of for loops that get a bit convoluted again. One thing is that if I put this var user sum inside of my for loop, what will happen is that each time this for loop runs, it's going to run this piece of code, and that resets user sum. So you usually want to declare variables like summing variables or whatever variable you're working with outside of a for loop. And you'll see here that now I'm getting 300 at the end, which isn't really the sum that I wanted, right? I wanted to add up, it should be 600. So what I can do here is something where I say, you know what? My user sum should be the previous sum that I had plus the current index, the current element of my array that I'm at. So this will say 0 is equal to 0 plus 100. And then it would say now user sum is 100. And then it will say 100 is equal to 100 plus 200, which then gives us 300. And then it will say 300 is equal to 300 plus 300. Okay, that's kind of what's going on there. So let's go ahead and see if this guy runs for us. And uh-oh. What might be happening here is I'm getting this kind of weird, like binary looking thing, right? So what's happening is this logic where we have everything as a, let me just double check where these are.
You're concatenating.
I'm concatenating them, right? Even though they look like they're numbers, what's happening is the, where was it there? We're not parsing them as numbers. So let me, chapter 9 is hefty, so let me just find where the parsing guy is there. Cool. So what we're going to do here is, as we already saw, I'm concatenating all these guys together. So what I need to do is try to transform them into integer values. And the way that I can transform them is by applying a conversion formula to what I want to convert into a value. And the way that we can do that is by using this parse int command. And you'll notice that it's pretty straightforward. If I type out lowercase p, parse, and then int, I then can open up my parenthesis and I can provide what I want to parse as a number. So now I'm going to say it's equal to the integer conversion of this string. So let me go ahead, set this guy up,
Let's go.
Nice, right? Cool.
Or once you do the parse to all the array that you have, you might actually just have a for loop just to change that to numbers, and then you can play with them after.
Yeah, absolutely. So you could just do that's actually a really good point. For when it gets, why don't we? This is a good point. So I have an array of values here, which is user entered. You could technically do something like for index is equal to 0, index is less than array of values dot length, index plus plus. You could say array of values at index is equal to the conversion of the guy. And then I don't think I even need to do it down here.
No. I bet no.
Let's see here. You never know. Nope. Oh, that's working for us. So now this manually converts it to integer array. Now, in languages like Java and C, you can't really do this, but in dynamic ones you can, which makes them easier for HTML and this type of like content that updates a lot. You don't want to have it statically typed too much. Okay. Cool. So, parse into your question.
You can use a map on the split. If you put split.map and set number. Oh, no. After
the split?
Yeah, put dot map.
Math?
No,
M-A-T?
map. M-A-P.
M-A-P? First, I substitute arguments. Oh, and can you map?
You put number.
Yeah. So I could say.
But I don't know if it's gonna work with. Oh yeah.
Actually,
it's gonna work.
Yeah, I think that might actually make it really easy for everyone. Let's see.
Now we're gonna have to comment the conversion.
Yeah, let me make a new array with this one. Let me see if I can map it as a number here. And then let me just use test array really quick. Because we can do it both ways. You know what? Yeah, let me do it that way. Let's make life a lot easier for all of us. Test array. Then let me just quickly. Okay.
User entry is a name that we came up with, right?
Yeah, everything that's light blue is something you made up. That's the
everything that is blue, light blue,
light blue. You'll see here orange, green, purple, pink, and this dark blue. It's all built in. These guys are stuff that we came up with.
Okay.
All right, let me see. Oh, nice. That makes it way easier. 600. Perfect. Yeah, so if you just simply, great point there. So that made my life a lot easier. If you just simply do .map number after you split your array, it will automatically apply all of them as a number for you. That could save a lot of headaches for this problem too, so you don't need to worry about parseInt. And again, parseInt and stuff, when we use that, we might use that for the error checking there. So what I want to do, this one method is kind of massive to get user entry. And I'll save it for the examples for us. But again, let me just try to make this a bit more helpful for your problems there. So what I could say here is, let me go ahead and make a second button here for us really quick. And I'll provide this in the notes and I'll add it to the Zoom track on click. So essentially, my get user entry is this type of like gargantuan piece of code. I'm just going to make two simple functions here. One is going to be called add numbers, and because I'm using the form elements there, I'm going to have to provide a parameter up there called form. I'm going to make a second function called subtract numbers that is also going to take in a form. I'm going to keep all this here for us, but essentially what I could do here now is on my onClick, for this one, instead of calling get numbers, I'm going to say add numbers, and then this one I'll call subtract numbers, this dot form.
Again, this dot form, what does it do again? Sorry.
Great question. So this dot form is a bit complicated in OOP, but essentially what we're doing here is this is going to look at the current instance of where this guy is existing inside this element. So he's going to kind of look at his parent of where it is. And if you say this dot form, it's going to say, okay, take a look at where this is, and this is input. And it's going to say, is there a form parent and input? And it jumps up here, and it is. You could also say something like this dot input there, and it would grab this one or this one. But because we're inside of a form, all this does, this dot form, is grab your parent of the form.
Okay.
This dot form is really only useful in this specific scenario. We'll find later on more effective ways to pass data around. But this dot form is one way to just take a look at your parent and grab it there.
Okay, but grab the information that is being inserted on ID.
It grabs, yeah, it grabs all the current HTML element of this guy. So it grabs from up to here to down here and everything inside of there, including what's inside of this guy. As the
right, and does what with it?
And it does what, sorry?
And does what with it?
So what it does here is if I have this dot form inside of add numbers, it then passes this dot form as the parameter here. So now I can parse and use my JavaScript to extract what the user typed in.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's based on the book and the way that you're doing the code there. So that's one way you could do it. Again, with JavaScript, you'll find if you go to W3 or Stack Overflow, there's like 100 different ways to do it. But the approach that we're using is using this form element. But again, if
basically this is the approach that we are using to call out a function.
Yeah, exactly. Just to show you again, you'll see here, if I redo this. Okay. If I redo this one more time, and I've add numbers, and I have the form there, you'll see I get the code that's there. So every time I click it, it gives me that HTML element of form. That's why we're passing it. And the reason that we want to pass it is so that we can get the elements from it.
Oh, I see. So now you can use whatever was written, whatever variable that was inside form.
Exactly, right? So now I have access to this input element. This is a bunch of stuff in JavaScript, but essentially if we scroll down to value inside of here, where the V is,
I saw you showing earlier this, but I just didn't understand very well.
This is a lot of ones, but essentially the piece of text that the user typed in is somewhere in here. it's like buried in there. Okay. And we're going to use the elements in specific. We don't want all of these guys. We only want one in specific, right? Which was this guy with the ID of text control. And you'll notice here that elements is also an array. So I'm able to use the array syntax, similar to what we did in the for loop, to grab it there. Okay. Great. And now you'll see I have text control. If I put in test, you'll see I don't actually get the input yet from it. The only thing I'm getting is just the variable. But if I add in the dot value, of course, like we saw earlier, now I'm getting it there.
Okay. Okay. Sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. It's a very kind of weird way of doing this. There's a bunch of different ways that you could do it, but the more practice you get with it, the better it is. And you'll see here that like there's a lot of syntax here that is referenced elsewhere, but it's just kind of how you do it. Cool. Nice. So now we have this the string. So let me go ahead and I'll call it var number entry is equal to this guy. So it's going to be the entry that they did. And then what we did previously, I think we called it var, let me just call it var values for the time being, is equal to number entry dot split. We're going to split by space. And again, I'm actually going to use, that's a really easier way to use it. I'm going to use this filter where if you do it this way, you'll have to remember to use the parse it method down here that we did. But if you don't want to do that, you can just map it to a number. So now each of these guys are a number. And what I could say here now is var total. I'm going to set that to 0. And let's go ahead and loop through this array that we just found. So what I could say here is for index is equal to 0. Index is less than values dot length. Index plus plus. Now I know it's late and everything, but does anyone know why we go less than instead of less than or equal to?
Oh.
So, yeah. Some of you might know.
If you go less than, you're not going to count the last number. So it's easier to... Oh, it's because it starts on 0.
Yes.
That's why.
Awesome, right? So this guy starts at 0, and our indexes go from 0 to... So if I have an array of 5 items, my indexes are 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is still 5 because we start at 0. If you do less than or equal to, your indexes are now 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, which is your 6th one. So 5 will be your 6th guy, which will give you a bunch of errors. So you just want to go less than. That's just a small. I don't get to show that off so often. So now I could say something down here where I say total is equal to total plus values at index. So get me the element in the array of values at this specific index. And then I do, let me just do a console.log or a print statement of total again. Okay, so I get 0, which is looking good. It's purple, so I know it's a number. Let's just do 50 and 50. I get 100, okay? 50 and 150. I get 200. Looks good. Okay. Let's try this out with our add numbers. So for the sake of time, because I know this video is probably getting long, I'm just going to kind of copy the same code. So I go ahead and grab those guys. I'm going to grab up my for loop. The only thing I'm going to change here is instead of adding them, I'm just going to simply subtract my values from each other. Okay. So 200 and 200. I add them to get 400. And I subtract them to get negative 400, which doesn't look too good for us here. This one should be 0. So let's try to see why this guy might not be working there. Let me see.
Do you have to do the number entry twice? Oh, you do because you're coming from you're calling the function subtraction, right?
Yeah, I might actually, let me see. No, I might just be doing something wrong here. Why is that happening? Let me see here. My ad's working. Total is equal to... Let me see. Let me just do something really quick here. Nope, still doing it. Okay, I'll come back to that one. I just kind of...
Close the console.
Yeah, where's that guy gone? He is. Okay, let me do 10 minus 10. So it's just making them negative there, is it?
The way you did, you were, yeah.
Total is equal to total minus values. I'm sure there's a little bug in there.
They're gonna have to use an if for the first value.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just so one thing here with this one, I'll fist up before I release it, but the add one's working okay. And again, the for your project 4 again, you're trying to find the mean of the variance, and the hardest part there is trying to parse those numbers and get them separated. And generally this is how you would do it there. Okay? Now for the last little part, I just want to show us, let me see, where is this guy? Cool. There's one that you're very familiar with. And I think all we need to do is, let me just change this one. Great. So instead of doing console.log like we are, and you know, I said that was similar to print, I'm going to alert the total to us. And let me do 100 and 100 again. Cool. And now we have the print statement, right? So if those one, it says this page says, but now I can get 200, and that's essentially something we've all seen before. So okay, so this is all editable too. You can change what this says. You can change this color scheme. You can change the background and what it says there. Okay, to whatever you'd like it to be. But that's essentially how you could alert the user for your project 4, where they are entering in something. Now, why is this important to do? Let's just say that during my for loop of add, if values of index, let me see here. Let me do one thing. There we go. Let me see here. Yeah, let me do one thing. So what I could say here now is if values of at index, if the value at my index is less than 0, let's say that I have a negative number for my add, I could go ahead and do something here where I can say something like alert, and I can manually type out the message here, error, negative value, something like this. Okay. And then I could do an else after this guy. Okay, so if I do 100 and 100, we'll see how I get 200 okay, but if I do 100 and then negative 100, you'll see I get error negative value. And it looks like I'm still getting my alert because it happens after my for loop, so I'd have to do a bit more down here with my logic to do it. But you can see here that it's only adding in the 100 at the end. It doesn't add my negative value onto it. So this is a really unique way to alert the user with these dialog prompts. And you can definitely customize it with your commas as well. Let's see here. Yeah, there's another one called confirm. Let's see here. How about instead of confirm, I'll say please don't enter negative values. Let me do it this way. Press this guy. This guy's working at 200, negative 100. Now we'll see here that confirm, instead of being an alert there, it says please don't enter negative values, and I have to hit OK or cancel. So it just gives you more options. Okay. Cool.